By the time the phone started crackling through the speakers, the night was already too quiet. It was a Sunday, the kind of evening that smelled like dish soap and leftover roast chicken. Mom was rinsing plates in the kitchen, humming some old 80s song under her breath. The TV glowed softly in the living room, volume low, cycling through some nature documentary nobody was really watching. My stepdad, Victor, sat in his recliner, scrolling through his phone like always, thumb moving in lazy arcs. And I was at the dining table, laptop open, pretending to work on a presentation while my eyes blurred the same sentence over and over. My name is Iris Calder. I used to think my life was, not perfect, but solid. A mother who loved me, a house that felt like home, and a stepfather who, on paper, looked like a blessing, stable job, polite smile, the kind of man people in church called a good provider. If you glanced at us from across the street, you'd think we were a postcard. The illusion started to crack the night the Bluetooth connected. I had forgotten I'd left my phone paired to the living room soundbar earlier, when I played music while cleaning. Now, as I tried to focus, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. New notification. I barely glanced at it. Then, without warning, the TV audio cut out. A sharp click. A swallow of static. And then my own voice, loud and painfully clear, filled the room. Okay, this is recording. Just in case I'm not crazy. I froze so hard my fingers hovered uselessly over the keyboard. My heartbeat felt like it moved into my throat. Across the room, Victor's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Mom turned off the faucet, droplets still sliding down her soapy hands. On the speakers, the recording continued. In the background of the recording, you could hear clinking glassware, the low hum of a restaurant, and then Victor's voice, colder, sharper than the one he used at home. Once the house is in my name, Claire's basically done, he said on the recording, calm and dismissive. Her daughter too. I'm not paying for some grown woman to chase her little career dreams forever. Mom's hands went completely still in the kitchen doorway. She looked from the speaker, to me, to Victor. For a heartbeat, none of us moved. Only the voice from last week, captured on my phone, now echoing through our living room, kept talking. They're both so easy to manage, Victor's recorded voice went on. You just have to make them feel guilty enough. Sign here, honey. Trust me. I've got us. I remember the exact sound that followed, the soft, wet clink of a plate slipping back into the sink. Mom's shoulders sagged, as if someone had pulled an invisible string. Victor lurched up from his recliner, face draining of color, then flushing red. Turn that off, he said, not shouting, but with a stiff edge that made my stomach twist. Iris. Turn it off. Now. My fingers fumbled for my phone, but not to stop the recording. Some part of me, the part that had been doubting my own instincts for months, watched the scene like it was playing in a cinema, the dim lamplight, the way Mom's eyes glassed over, the way Victor's mask slipped, just a fraction. The calm life I had been clinging to, the one built on, maybe I'm overreacting, and, he didn't mean it that way, shattered right there, in front of the TV and the half-finished dishes. And this was only the part they were hearing by accident. The rest of the recording, the part that truly showed who he was still waiting on my phone. Unplayed. Unheard. Yet. 2 weeks earlier, if you told me I'd be secretly recording my stepfather, I would have laughed it off as paranoia. I grew up with a different man in this house, my father, Daniel. He died when I was 16, and I remember the way the light felt different for months afterward. Dust in the hallway, cold tile on my bare feet, my mother's distant stare. For so long, this house carried grief like another piece of furniture. When Victor appeared 3 years later, he brought noise. Laughter. Repairs. Grocery bags. It felt like proof that life could restart. By the time I turned 26, he'd been in our lives for nearly 7 years. He paid the property taxes when Mom's hours at the clinic were cut. He helped me with the down payment on my used car. He talked about our family like he'd always been part of it. People trusted him because Mom did. And she trusted him because she was tired of doing everything alone. That was what he gambled on. The first fissure was small. A bank envelope on the kitchen counter, addressed to Victor, with our address in the corner. I wasn't snooping, I was just clearing the table and it slipped into my hands. The words, property transfer, caught my eye through the clear plastic window. We never used to get property letters. The house was paid off years ago. I'll take that, Victor said behind me, his tone light, his fingers just a little too quick as he plucked it from my hand. Just boring paperwork from the bank. You don't want to get headaches like us old people, kiddo. He called me kiddo like it was affectionate, but it always felt like a gentle pat on the head. A reminder of where he thought I belonged. That night, I asked Mom about it while we folded laundry on her bed. The yellow lamplight made everything look softer than it felt. Are you changing anything with the house? I tried to sound casual. I saw property transfer on the envelope. Mom glanced at the doorway, then back to the towel in her hands. Just some refinancing Victor's handling, she said. He says it'll make things easier if something happens. He's better with that stuff than I am. But the deed is still in your name, right? I pressed. Her jaw tightened. It was subtle, but I've been watching her face since I was a child. Don't start, Iris. He's trying to help. You know how generous he's been. I knew. He'd remind us often enough. The more I asked, the more defensive she became. Every concern I raised became an accusation that I was ungrateful, stuck in the past, unwilling to let someone else take care of us. The weight of it settled on my chest. If I pushed too hard, I risked breaking the fragile stability my mother clung to. It wasn't just the house. It was my last link to my father, the one place that still smelled like his cologne in the winter when the vents first kicked on. It was also my future. I didn't have a trust fund or savings to float me if things went wrong. I was a junior designer at a small marketing agency, barely covering student loans and car repairs. If Victor was doing something with the house behind our backs, we could lose it. Mom could lose everything she'd rebuilt. I could lose the only consistent thing I'd ever known. That realization sat with me in the dark at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the old foundation. The fear didn't arrive as a storm, it seeped in like a slow leak. I started watching him more closely. The way his voice changed on the phone when he thought nobody was listening. The way he always had a reason Mom should sign something, now, before we forget. The way he'd joke about me being expensive anytime my name and money were in the same sentence. I didn't set out for revenge. I just wanted to know if I was imagining things. I wanted proof that I wasn't losing my mind, or proof that I was, so I could stop torturing myself. Instead, I found something much uglier, the possibility that the man my mother loved was playing both of us. And that was when I opened the voice recorder app on my phone for the first time. The night I made the recording, the restaurant smelled like garlic, cheap wine, and something burnt. It was Victor's idea to celebrate. New beginnings, he'd said brightly, waving a manila envelope I wasn't allowed to touch. Mom had worked an extra shift, and she looked tired but happy, eyeliner smudged at the corners from a long day. I went mostly to keep her company. After dessert, Mom excused herself to the restroom. Victor's phone started buzzing on the table. He frowned at the screen, then stood. Work call, he sighed. I'll step outside. You girls relax. He walked toward the patio, not realizing the glass wall was more reflective than soundproof. I watched his reflection as he lifted the phone to his ear. something inside me nudged me into motion. My hand slipped into my bag, fingers finding my phone. I opened the voice memo app like I was muscle memory trained. Hit record. I left it on the table, screen face down, mic pointed toward the glass. I didn't hear all of it right away. The restaurant was loud, and I was pretending to scroll, pretending not to watch his posture turn looser, more confident, once Mom was out of view. I caught fragments in real time. Yeah, the papers are done. House will be under my name by the end of the month, he said. Forks clinked. A server dropped a tray behind me. I strained to listen. Claire. She thinks it's for emergency planning. A short laugh. She signs whatever I put in front of her. Guilt is a wonderful thing. My stomach nodded. A part of me wanted to storm outside and demand every piece of paper he'd ever made Mom sign. Another part, the quieter, colder part, whispered, no. Keep listening. When Mom came back, I stopped recording. I didn't even replay it that night. Fear and denial are powerful sedatives. I tucked the phone into my bag, laughed stiffly at his jokes, and let the evening end. It wasn't until 3 days later, alone in my room with the door locked, that I pressed play. The sound in my headphones was clearer than I expected. Dishes, murmurs, the low hum of air conditioning, and Victor's voice, waiting for me. You understand I don't want the daughter included in any of this, right? He said. She's not mine. I'm not paying for her future on top of everything else. A pause on the line, then a smooth, male voice I didn't recognize. We can structure the will as you prefer, Mr. Hartley. But your wife would need to agree. Please, Victor scoffed. She'll do whatever I tell her. She's terrified of being alone. Besides, I've been handling the finances for years. She signs, and I tell her it's for security. She has no idea I've been adding my name to everything. I stopped the recording, hand trembling over the pause icon. It wasn't just the house. It was the method. Guilt. Manipulation. Isolation. Everything I'd been trying not to see, laid out like a business plan. When I hit play again, the conversation went deeper. He talked about moving Mom's savings into joint accounts, so if she goes first, it's all mine. He mentioned a woman named Tessa, and joked about trading up once he was financially secure. The lawyer's voice was calm, neutral, clinical. I listened to all 24 minutes. Twice. By the end, my idea of Victor was no longer cracked, it was dust. The recording sat on my phone like a loaded weapon I hadn't meant to create. I knew what it meant. It was proof of intent. Proof of financial manipulation. Proof that my mother's trust was being used as leverage against her. But proof is useless if you don't know what to do with it. So I did the only thing that made sense, I backed it up. I saved a copy to my laptop. I emailed it to a burner address I made just for that. I took screenshots of the file info, the date and time. And then I printed something else, something I found when I finally convinced Mom to show me just one of the documents Victor had asked her to sign. It was a transfer of full rights to the house in case of her death, with language that strongly favored him. Her signature was at the bottom. That night, while she slept, I put the printed transfer and a USB drive with the recording into a plain manila folder. On the tab, in pencil, I wrote a single word, truth. I didn't know it yet, but that folder would be the quiet bomb in the middle of our living room. The accidental playback on the soundbar wasn't part of the plan. It just happened to be the spark that lit everything faster. After Victor demanded I stop the recording's audio in the living room, the silence that followed was dense and sticky. Mom stared at the speaker like it had grown teeth. Victor ran a hand through his hair, composure leaking out of him. What was that? Mom asked, voice small. A misunderstanding, he said quickly. Some chopped up audio. Iris, did you edit that? Is this some kind of sick joke? I held my phone in both hands so he wouldn't see how much they shook. It's a raw recording, I said, keeping my tone even. From the dinner at La Terraza. The night you brought that envelope. He laughed, the sound brittle. You're twisting things. You don't know how legal conversations work. There's context. I'd spent the past week learning about context, reading about financial abuse, power of attorney, and property transfers at 3 a.m. I knew enough to recognize an abuser scrambling. Maybe everyone should hear the context, I replied quietly. He didn't know I'd already changed the venue of this conversation. Earlier that day, I'd called my aunt, my late father's sister. I'd told her we needed family over for dinner, because Mom hadn't seemed like herself. I let my voice crack in the right places. She brought my uncle and cousins. My mother, thinking it was just a casual get-together, agreed. What I didn't tell Victor was that Aunt Nora had also brought someone else, a lawyer who had known my father years ago, now semi-retired but very interested when he heard Victor's name and the words, property transfer, and recording. They were in the kitchen now, pretending to make coffee. Sit down, Victor, I said. Please. He bristled. You don't tell me what to. Victor. My mother's voice cut through, soft but firm. He looked at her and froze. There was something in her expression he wasn't used to, doubt. Reluctantly, he sat. I turned the volume on the soundbar down to a reasonable level and tapped the screen. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed calm. I'm going to play the full recording, I said. And then, if I've misunderstood anything, you'll have every chance to explain. He stood halfway again. Absolutely not. You can't just. It might be better if you did, a new voice said from the kitchen doorway. We all turned. Aunt Nora stepped into the room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Beside her was a man in his 60s in a navy blazer, holding a steaming mug. This is Daniel's old friend, Michael Santos, she said to Mom. He's a lawyer. I asked him to drop by, just in case things were complicated. My mother's eyes filled with tears even before the truth arrived. Just the mention of my father's name in this context, of legal help, told her what I had been too afraid to say out loud. Victor's face went a shade I'd never seen before. Iris, Mom whispered. Is this really necessary? I think it's the only way to make sure we're all seeing the same picture, I said. Then I pressed play. This time, I didn't flinch at my own voice starting the recording. As Victor's words filled the room, about the house, about my mother signing whatever he put in front of her, about not wanting the daughter to benefit, nobody spoke. A fork slid off a plate somewhere behind me. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The air conditioner kicked on with a low, steady hum, as if even the house was listening. Mom's face went through a slow, agonizing evolution, confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally a hollow sort of quiet. When he mentioned trading up and the name Tessa, her hand went to her mouth. Victor tried to interrupt twice, leaning forward, reaching for the remote. Aunt Nora quietly moved it further down the table. The lawyer watched him with an expression I couldn't read. When the recording ended, the room felt bigger and smaller at the same time. Even the pictures on the walls seemed to be staring. Victor exhaled loudly. You're all overreacting, he said. That's not how I meant any of it. People say things. Jokes. And that lawyer was pushing for scenarios. Michael, the attorney, set his cup down carefully. What I heard was fairly unambiguous, Mr. Hartley. Your intent was to restructure assets in a way that excluded Iris and left your wife vulnerable. That, combined with the document Claire signed, could be considered coercive, especially if she was misinformed. Mom turned to Victor, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Did you tell me the truth about those papers?" she asked. His answer, hesitation, eyes shifting, shoulders squaring as if for a fight, was all the answer she needed. "I thought I was planning our future," she whispered. "Not handing you the keys to erase us." Quiet revenge doesn't come with shouting or overturned chairs. It comes with the slow dismantling of a lie, brick by brick, until the person who built it is standing in the open with nowhere to hide. By the end of the evening, with Michael's guidance, Mom had revoked the power of attorney she'd unknowingly signed. The property transfer process was paused pending review. Victor's protests grew weaker as his legal footing crumbled. He didn't go to jail that night. There were no handcuffs, no dramatic exit. But something far more devastating happened to him. The performance ended. The man everyone thought he was peeled away, and what stood there, exposed in the soft glow of our living room, was just a selfish, frightened man who had gambled on our silence. And lost. Victor moved out 3 days later. He didn't slam the door. He didn't even say goodbye to me. He shuffled boxes into his car under a gray sky, the driveway slick from a morning drizzle. Mom watched from the front window with her arms wrapped around herself, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in her hands. "You don't have to watch," I told her softly. "I do," she replied. "I need to see him go. Or I'll never believe he's gone." The legal process that followed was slow but steady. With Michael's help, Mom filed for separation and then divorce. The recording became part of the documentation, alongside the suspicious paperwork and banking changes. Victor fought at first, threatening countersuits, accusing us of entrapment. But the thing about a voice recording is that it doesn't tire. It doesn't change its story. It simply plays, the same words, the same tone, every single time. Within months, the house was secured back under Mom's name, with clear protections written in. Victor walked away with less than he'd hoped for. There were no triumphant headlines, no social media posts. Just signatures, stamped pages, and an address he no longer had a key for. The real work, for us, started after. For weeks, the house felt strangely empty, even though physically nothing had changed. His chair was still in the living room. His mug still sat in the cupboard. It was the absence of his constant commentary that was the loudest. No passive-aggressive remarks about bills, no sighs over my expensive hobbies, no casual criticisms disguised as jokes. One evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out in front of us, Mom let out a shaky breath. "I'm ashamed," she said. I looked up from my calculator. Of what? Of letting it get this far. Of not listening to you earlier. Of signing things I didn't understand because it felt easier than fighting. Her eyes were glossy but dry. I thought needing help made me weak. Turns out, ignoring my own instincts did. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "You trusted someone who was supposed to be trustworthy," I said. "That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something he should be ashamed of." She nodded, but I could tell it would take time for her to believe it. As for me, I kept thinking about the moment the recording first played through the speakers by accident. The universe has a sense of timing, apparently. I'd intended to share it, but carefully, with an intro, a build-up, the right legal support in place. Instead, it burst out on its own, raw and undeniable. Maybe that was fitting. Truth doesn't always wait for our perfect stage directions. A few weeks later, I opened the voice memo app again. Not to spy or prove anything this time, but to capture something I didn't want to forget. I set the phone on my desk, pressed record, and started talking. "I'm Iris," I said quietly. "I lived with a lie for a long time. Today, the house feels different. There's more silence, but it's a kind of silence I can breathe in. Mom is learning to read every document twice. I'm learning to trust my instincts, even when they're inconvenient. I talked about small things, the way the light fell in the hallway again like it did when my father was alive, the way Mom laughed for the first time in months when our old toaster burned the bread and set off the smoke alarm. The way I'd started leaving my resume out, considering jobs in other cities, not because I needed to escape, but because I finally believed I didn't have to stay stuck. When I finished, I saved the file and renamed it, After. The folder on my desk, the one marked Truth, now held both the recording that exposed Victor and the new one that marked our first steps away from him. Side by side, they looked like bookends. One held the worst of who he was. The other held the beginning of who I was becoming. Months later, when the divorce was finalized, Mom and I celebrated with takeout Chinese on the living room floor. No TV, no soundbar, just us and the rustle of paper boxes. To boring paperwork that keeps us safe, Mom said, raising a plastic cup of soda. To listening to ourselves, I added, tapping my cup against hers. We never played Victor's recording again after the court was done with it. It stayed archived, a quiet piece of evidence in some digital folder and in a labeled envelope in a fireproof box. We didn't need to hear it anymore. We'd lived through its consequences. But every once in a while, when doubt crept back in, about my judgment, about my right to question what felt wrong, I'd play a minute of the After recording and listen to my own voice. Steady. Clear. Learning. That was the real revenge, I realized, not his downfall, not the legal victory, not even the gasps in the living room when the recording first played. The real revenge was that his attempt to rewrite our story had failed. We were the ones holding the pen again. And this time, we were telling the truth.